Welcome to the Boxing Source Podcast, where we go over the latest news in boxing and react to all of the fights that happened in the past week. Now, let's go to our host, J.R. Bell. Yo, checking in, Mike. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We should be in. We should be live. You should be able to see me here as we are here for the last podcast of 2025 here for December 28th here. And, it's been some type of year in the sport of boxing. It's been some type of year in the sport of boxing. And, we've had a lot of great events over the course of 2025. And y'all know that, when we have the last podcast of the year, it's pretty much like a special show for the year. As, we have the award show at the end of the year, pretty much on the podcast episode. So we're going to be having the Boxing Source Award Show here for 2025 here in this edition of the Boxing Source podcast. So we're going to be doing all of that. I'm going to see here if I will be able to get my panelists here to join us here later on down the line, but we'll see how that works out. And once that happens, then we're going to be, talking about what went down over the course of the year, and have the Source Awards, or the Boxing Source Awards, as they say, not necessarily the Source Awards, but the Boxing Source Awards. Yeah, we can't even have the Source Awards back. You know what I mean. But with that being said, we got a number of things here that we're going to be talking about before we actually go through that whole thing with the award show. Hopefully everyone is able to properly tune in and things like that. We got multiple apparatuses that we're able to show this live here. Whether it's through Rumble, whether it's through YouTube, whether it's through Instagram, and then we're going to try to have it on Kick as well. So we got a number of ways that we'll be able to show this particular stream. But shout out to everyone that's being able to listen live, and if you're going to be checking out the replay, props to y'all. All right, so we got to get into it as far as like what went down this weekend. Yes, we did have fights that did take place over in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia on Saturday. Yeah, it was over there in Riyadh, and it was mad early for those in the East Coast or whatever it is. You feel me? And things like that. So we'll be able to kind of like check that out there in a little moment. We'll see if we also add some folks in to chime in and things like that. So we're gonna see how that works out. I'm gonna see here how I'll be able to properly share that. What's the word? What's good there? Never forward sports in the building. You know what I mean? Checking in and stuff like that. So I'm gonna see here if I'll be able to jump in. Steph in the building. What's going on with you here? Checking out the Boxing Source here on December 28th, 2025. Now, I was talking about the thing there in reference to, what went down for Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. All right, we had Ring 5, right? There were a number of fights that were originally scheduled there for Ring 5, but a couple of them didn't necessarily happen. We had one of those world title fights that ended up getting scrapped. You know what I mean? And I think there was like another fight that could have happened there on that fight card, and then that didn't quite go down. So would have had like I think about 6 or 7 fights on the docket, but it ended up being like about 4 or 5, and that was pretty much it there. Yes, salute, man. Happy holidays to everyone. Also, what I mean, shout out to Steph there in the building. But we had a couple of fights that were in focus here for what happened in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Yeah, it was called Ring 5 Night of the Samurai. It was featuring. It was going to be featuring a number of fighters from Japan. Going up against a number of fighters that may have been from Mexico or a couple of other countries here and there. But as I said, there was one fight that ended up getting scrapped because someone suffered a cut during training, and then there was another fight that was scrapped altogether because a fighter got sick over there in Saudi Arabia, man. You know what I mean? And with that, one of the notes I did have a reference to that is, man, I'm gonna just be real with y'all. I don't know what it is in the atmosphere over there, but it looks like every time that there's like an event out there in Saudi Arabia, it looks like somebody that's involved with the event gets sick or something. You know what I mean? Like if y'all remember the whole thing with February 22nd and how all of that stuff went down. You had so many people that ended up not making it or being sick and being scrapped out the card, and they had like rumors of one person getting sick and then spreading it to just about everybody that's involved. That was crazy. But going to this particular card, you had it to where one fighter, at the weigh-in, he was there for the weigh-in and it was able to make weight, but after that, it was like, nah, he couldn't. It was like he was completely dehydrated or something. So you had a world title fight that ended up getting scrapped there on one side, and then yeah, that thing with Kenshiro Taraji was supposed to be fighting on the card. So that kind of made it a little bit of a downer of sorts when it came to the overall event. But you still had the co-feature bout and the main event that was still intact, and a number of people were interested in that because of two fighters involved in it. If they won, then they will be in a collision course for a super fight in 2026. So you got the whole thing there with the co-feature bout, right? You got Junto Nakatani versus Sebastian Hernandez Reyes. There with Junto Nakatani having his first bout at 122 pounds. He has been the world champion there at 118. He's kind of like been viewed as one of the more dangerous fighters there within that particular division and whatnot. So here we are, we're seeing here what he's going to do at 122. First bout in the super bantamweight division, going up against Sebastian Hernandez, and going into the fight, pre-fight odds, they were highly favoring Junto Nakatani in that one. But Sebastian Hernandez, credit to Sebastian Hernandez, he was really game, really active over the course of 12 rounds in that fight. Thing was, at least for me, watching it, that in the first few rounds of the fight, you kind of like seeing Junto Nakatani fighting off of his back foot there in the southpaw stance, having the lead right hand, lead right jab, and he was able to, follow through with the left hand, left uppercuts, left hooks, and kind of like catch Sebastian Hernandez, while fighting off of his back foot. And I thought he was like very sharp within those first 5 or 6 rounds, and the thing was with Hernandez, he was just coming forward and walking and trying to walk through a number of those punches. And yeah, while he was getting tagged a number of times early in that fight, he was still consistent, still working, still going forward. And by the time it was around like round 6, you had a pretty good exchange there between Junto Nakatani and Sebastian Hernandez on that. And I felt like that was one of the better rounds of the year. Too bad it could be entered in for round of the year for the Boxing Source Awards. But I mean, hey, you can't, you couldn't have a late entry there or a writing candidate. But that's a whole nother thing because we did have a good number of candidates for round of the year. But that one was a good one. Then you had round 9 that had a couple of good moments between Sebastian Hernandez and Junto Nakatani, and then by that time you kind of like seen the consistent work of Sebastian Hernandez start to get to Junto Nakatani, right? And I think at that point you had like a few rounds where Junto Nakatani didn't necessarily fight off of his back foot, but he kind of like reacted a little bit more to what Sebastian Hernandez was doing. What I mean by that is like in those first few rounds, you kind of like seen Junto Nakatani like throw the right jab, and throw it, and then follow up. So even if you had a point where Sebastian Hernandez was within range and started to throw punches, you already had Junto Nakatani like throwing a jab or scoring a couple of jabs before Sebastian Hernandez got within range, started to throw punches, and even with that, you still seen Junto Nakatani like follow up with the left hand. But in the midway point of the fight, you kind of like seen that particular part of the game plan from Junto Nakatani kind of like go out the window, so to speak. And you had Sebastian Hernandez continue to work, continue to be consistent and throwing punches, Now, did they have the same snap as Junto Nakatani? No, but it was still like almost like what would you say? Like getting hit with a 1,000 needles or something like that. You know what I mean? I don't know. That's like a Cactuar reference in Final Fantasy or something. I don't know. But you still seen Sebastian Hernandez just keep working, keep working, right? And eventually, it did get to Junto Nakatani there between like rounds 9 and round 10, and you seen the eye for Junto Nakatani start to close, and that made it to be like you had a little bit of suspense in this particular fight. Now, given that and what I said in reference to like round 6 and round 9, you even had a good round in round 11 between both of those guys, because I think at that point you had the thing with Junto Nakatani having the eye closed, and you seen the fight kind of like shift over towards Sebastian Hernandez. And at that point, I think both fighters knew, or both corners knew, that the fight could basically be in the balance at that point, and they both went at it. They're at different parts of round 11, so that was another good round in this particular fight. I think a number of people were surprised that this fight was, as good as it was, so to speak. They thought it was going to be something where Junto Nagatani was going to be able to break down and stop Sebastian Hernandez, and it almost seemed like that within the first half of the fight, because Sebastian Hernandez was catching a whole lot of power punches, a whole lot of left hands, left uppercuts was like really landing, and you kind of like seeing that there from Junto Nagatani. But shout out to Sebastian Hernandez. He was definitely game there on this particular joint here, right? So you kind of like had that going down, and round 11 passed. Then you had round 12, and like I said, once again, good exchanges from both Junto Nagatani and Sebastian Hernandez. And through the 12 rounds, you went to the scorecards, and it was a close fight. And it was two scores of 115, 113, and one score of 118, 110 in favor of Junto Nakatani for him to stay undefeated. Now, 115, 113, 7 rounds to 5 in favor of Junto Nakatani. A lot of people don't have any problems with that. 118, 110 for Junto Nakatani, that's 10 rounds to 2. Like, come on, man. 10 rounds to 2. Yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I don't see how you could have it 10 rounds in favor of Junto Nagatani, especially with what happened in the second half of the fight. That one was where you had a number of those rounds in favor of Sebastian Hernandez. Some people would go to the punch stats and things like that. They had it to where Junto Nakatani had outlanded Sebastian Hernandez, over the course of 12 rounds, but it was pretty close with the number of punches. 297 punches landed for Junto Nakatani. 273 punches landed for Sebastian Hernandez, and a huge majority of those punches from Hernandez were power punches. You really didn't see that many jabs out there from Sebastian Hernandez, and it showed like it was only 26 jabs landed from Sebastian Hernandez over the course of 12 rounds. But I thought that was one of the better fights that we've had this year. If you really think about it, particularly from like I said, round 6 up to round 12. Good action from both of these fighters, and Sebastian Hernandez just keeps working and just kept going forward, kept working, landing, trying to throw punches and things like that. I just feel like from a judge's perspective, so to speak, right? If you're looking up at the fighters, when and that's the thing, they look up. They don't necessarily look at the level or looking down. They look up. So there might be there might be a number of things that they end up missing at different parts of the ring, given that they're at one side of the ring. You know what I mean? But I think to the point where they did give credit, or at least two of those judges did give credit to the activity of Sebastian Hernandez, but one judge didn't necessarily do that. Maybe it was something where, it could have been close rounds, and they gave the majority of the close rounds to Junto Nagatani. But, from looking at it, almost like eye level or above that, watching it, on camera, it was a very close fight there between those two. Now, what does this mean for Junto Nakatani? Well, I mean, he moves forward. He stays undefeated there, has his first win in the super bantamweight division, and see what's going to be happening there with Naoya Inoue, which we're going to be talking about here later on. For Sebastian Hernandez, that was an absolutely great showing there from Sebastian Hernandez, man. I would think that you will see more from Sebastian Hernandez later on down the line here in 2026. Now, I was going to see if I could go ahead and check the ratings of what I had so far within the super bantamweight division, right? Like you already had Junto Nakatani at number one in the WBC. You know, Sebastian Hernandez was like number 11 in the WBO. From the latest ratings there, they had Nakatani at number one anyway, so he's already like the top contender in all four sanctioning bodies, right? But when it came to Sebastian Hernandez, he was like around like number 10 in the WBC, number 11 in the WBO, and I would say like number 12 there in the IBF, right? So you kind of like seen him be up there as far as like trying to get up the rankings within the 122-pound division. But with this showing right here against Junto Nakatani, like he definitely made the name of himself there in that particular fight. So, props to Sebastian Hernandez there, and that ended up being just his first loss of his professional career. And then you'll have the showing there against Junto Nakatani, which is viewed as one of the top pound for pound fighters in the sport. So that kind of like gives you something there as far as like what Sebastian Hernandez could be at like there on that front. Now, I mean, we had what was it like another fight within that 122-pound division, a couple of weeks ago or something like that. That was on the Pro Box card, and a Sebastian Hernandez versus Ramon Cardenas at 122. That could be an absolute great fight because remember Cardenas had a impressive knockout victory on Pro Box there. Coming off of his loss that he had against Naoya Inoue in May of this year over in Las Vegas. So that kind of like tells you what you got in store there within the 122-pound division going into 2026. And wanted to go into, of course, the main event there, Naoya Inoue going up against David Allen Romero, Picasso, Romero. Listen, he had about like 15 names or something like that, that people were referring to him as. I don't know, man. Y'all hit him up and ask him like what his in-ring name is, because he was like David Allen Picasso Romero or something, almost like the Dikembe Mutombo. Shout out to Dikembe Mutombo, rest in power, man. But that was, of course, for the undisputed super bantamweight titles there with Naoya Inoue, of course, undefeated, defended the super bantamweight titles there, and going into this to see what would happen because as I mentioned, if he was able to get this win and we see what happened there with Junto Nakatani, then they would be on a collision course, for 2026. And for Naoya Inoue, of course, given what was happening in the co-feature bout, it's like, oh man, that fight was really close. Hey, I don't know if I could, really play around or anything like that. And you had, David Allen Picasso that, was going in there, with great intentions as far as like being able to, score a win or try to score an upset, man. But hey, Naoya Inoue wasn't really playing around here on this one. He was not. Picasso came in there with that record of 32 wins, 0 losses, and 1 draw. But you talk about a whole different class. That was Naoya Inoue. You know what I mean? That was Naoya Inoue. Shout out to Never Fold Sports in the building. Yeah, I'm gonna see here if I could share that link here real quick. If you're able to jump in on to join in the conversation. So I'm gonna see here if I can get that on here. But he says that Naoya Inoue is ducking 126 and 130. But I mean, I'm gonna go into what he was able to do against David Picasso. I'll say right. He outperformed David Picasso. There wasn't really much of an answer there from Picasso over the course of these 12 rounds. Inoue pretty much like dominated, so to speak, to where he was landing almost twice as many punches per round than David Picasso. And he just went in there en route and had the unanimous decision victory. One judge had it all 12 rounds in favor of Naoya Inoue. Another one gave them all but one round, and then you had one score of 117 to 111. That's pretty much what, like 9 rounds to three. In favor of Naoya Inoue for him to defend those undisputed super bantamweight titles. So I mean, that just tells you there. Okay, that lines everything up for Naoya Inoue versus Junto Nakatani in Japan. There, I put this post up there. Never Fold, shout out to Never Fold Sports here in the building, saying that Naoya Inoue is ducking 126 and 130-pound divisions there, man. So that's what you got there on this front. But with that being said, we got to see like how it's going to work out for these two fighters. Now we're trying to see if we could arrange to have one guest on here. I guess he was checking out these fights and he's seeing what was happening there with Naoya Inoue, and he's saying that a ducking the smoke at featherweight and super featherweight. So we're trying to see if we could check in here with great guests here. Should be Never Fold Sports in the building here. So we're seeing if we could get the mic thing here sorted out for him, and then he'll be able to join us here on this front. So,
Yo, yo, yo.
Sports, what's good?
What's good with you, Boxing Source?
All good, man. All good, man. Hey, just winding the year down. We getting into 2026, and I'm talking about the whole joint that happened over in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, man. Hey, what did you think about those two fights there, the co-feature and the main event?
Man, come on. First thing first, with me, with Inoue, bro, with all this pound for pound talk they talking about, pound for pound don't look down, they look up. Why he not trying to move up to 26 and 30? It ain't nothing at 22. He steady trying to pull these little guys, go up. Know what I'm saying? People, every time you say that, people get mad. But other people, when have you heard pound for pound fighters, they always put their names together with the guys under them. Shakur Stevenson, what I said about him, he need to move up to 40. What he doing right now? Going up to 40. What Bud did, 68. Come on. In a way, don't get excluded from that. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing at 22 anymore. Nothing. He's literally fighting against Picasso. Like, he supposed to get him out the paint. He was securing a bag. People don't want to give him backlash for that. Anybody else do it, they would have been like, yo, why he ain't knock him out, stop him? He did that purposely so that way he secures the bag for that Junto fight. Look at Junto in that fight. He lost that fight. The best he could have gotten was a draw. But not on my side. He lost that fight. He supposed to be thinking about revenge. You seen his face? The way come on. First half of the fight, he was there. Second half of the fight, come on, bro. You feel me? We not giving no passes. Junto did not look good. You know what I'm saying? He moved up and he found out this is not the low weight division. You moving up. When you moving up, the guys are stronger. They could take your power. All that. So
Mm.
Junto, he needs to run it back with Buddy. And then with Inoue, move up. I don't want to see no Junto, Inoue find these lower weight guys. Move up. Go to 26. Go see Espinosa, Nick Ball, Shushu, and these guys. So with me, I wasn't impressed. The things that Inoue did versus who? Who's Picasso? Who? He's
Mm.
ranked high and what? But what has he accomplished? Who has he beaten? Know what I'm saying? So it's like you guys is saying this and that he did good against somebody that he should have looked good against. I'm not about to give Inoue points for doing what he should be doing. He should look like that against a Picasso. As a matter of fact, he should have KO'd him and knocked him out. Even he came out and he let the world know like, yo, he ain't like his performance, right? That's 100 to him because that's a real competitor. He knew he should have went out there and did better after the fight. He came out and said what he said. So hey, it's the fans that's sugarcoating and trying to baby Inoue.
Well, on the case there with Naoya Inoue in this fight against Romero or Picasso, like I said, he got like 15 different names, right? Before the fight, they had pre-fight odds with Naoya Inoue as high as a 50-1 favorite against Picasso. At the minimum, a 30-1 favorite. So, to your point about Inoue being there at 122, he's facing these guys, and having these odds where he's almost like a 20-1 or
Yeah,
like a 30-1 favorite against like a Picasso or someone maybe like a MJ Akhmadaliev, and then you had the whole thing with Ramon Cardenas in May, and I almost overlooked his fight that he had in January, where he ended up facing a last minute replacement there in Ye Jun Kim. So he's had 4 fights here in 2025, but all of those fights he was highly favored against. And so,
yeah,
you do have the thing there where he's came up from a certain weight class, whether it's like 105 or like 112 or something. And now he's at 122. But they were talking about him moving up to 126 since what, 2023? And
yeah,
we still, haven't seen that because some folks are talking about him, facing like a Bruce Carrington at 126 or something like that, or maybe the the champions out there at 126 in in Rafael Espinoza, right? So those were the fights that they were looking at and saying, "Hey, this could be, where you could see where Naoya Inoue is at as far as like overall pound for pound." But he's still, just defending those titles there at 122, and it's like is going to, go for another defense of those titles against Junto Nakatani in 2026. Now, after that, maybe he could move up, but at least for right now, it's like, yeah, he's kind of saying that he's good at 122.
yeah. So basically, for me, what he's doing is he's milking that weight division, right? He's milking it because once he beat MJ, who did people had beaten anyway? Besides, it wasn't even that many people that even picked MJ to beat him. So
Hmm.
after he beat MJ, it's over with. So move
Yeah.
up. You know what I'm saying? He milking the weight division, and people hearing that he's fighting. What's buddy name? Kim John whatever Yee whatever. Cardenas. Louis Neri, and then Picasso. That's pound for pound right there. Number one. I see people talk about some number one. Oh, all right. At this point, I'm finna put the boxing source on my pound for pound. Cause it don't matter who you fight against. You can put whoever you want on a pound for pound nowadays. Like, yo, I'm not saying he's not pound for pound, but to be saying he's number one, this and that, fighting against who? Let's talk about the last 4 fights he had. That's pound for pound. Because anybody of his caliber would have been at that weight class, would have been defeating those same type of guys the same weight.
Man, so you basically like you treat Nayo in a way like Teddy Atlas is treated Gennady Golovkin. Against who? Against who? Against
Hey,
who?
listen,
Oh, hey.
listen. Me, I don't. Nobody get no passes. It could have been Bud Usyk. You think I want to give Usyk the number one spot after Bud just left? He earned it. So that's the truth right there. He been heading towards the smoke. Du Bois, nobody asked him to rematch Du Bois. He did that because he wanted to, right?
Mm.
So anyway, he got to do the same thing others is doing. We ain't giving no passes. You think Boots is on my pound for pound? Who has he beat? We ain't giving no passes, bro. In other leagues and other sports, when you talk about MVP, people put up those numbers that year. We don't care what Inoue did previously. 2025, it's the end of 2025, 2026. Know what I'm saying? He got to step the game up, bro. We ain't doing that, bro.
Mm. So I mean, like I was mentioning there with Nayo anyway on his front, as far as like the 4 fights that he's had this year, I mean, yeah, he's been active, but when I talked about the thing with the overall odds or the pre-fight odds for Nayo anyway against these fighters is like when you have it at minimum a 30-1 or a 25-1 favorite, that's that's just crazy to see how much he's like they say that he's much better than these other fighters at 122 pounds. And you bring up the thing there with MC Akhmadaliev, right? Like Akhmadaliev should have been like the last fighter within that part or that crop of 122 pounders that Nayo Inoue could fight. And if he beats him, then that should be it. Like the saying goes, you cleaned out the division. So if you fight Akhmadaliev and you beat him, you basically cleaned out the division, right?
Yeah, that's a fact.
So
Anybody say otherwise, they hating. He cleaned out that division.
yeah.
So
So once that happens, then that should be a wrap. That's it. You don't need to be at 122 anymore. The only thing was, it's like they say, hey, we could potentially have you fighting Junto Nakatani in a super fight there in Japan. So if Nakatani wasn't like even anywhere in the picture or anywhere near the picture, then maybe we could have had, Inoue going up to 126 a little bit sooner. But it say like, hey, this fight between him and Nakatani is just way too much money for them to, not have. So that's kind of like how they, approach this thing here. You know what I mean? So that's kind of like how it goes on that front. You feel
And
me?
then another thing with that is like this. How many fighters you see fighting 4 times a year against top tier competition? Bro, you're not gonna be fighting 4 times a year fighting top tier competition, bro. You're gonna get hurt, stuff gonna happen, you're gonna need time to recover. You see the fact that he's fighting 4 times a year. It's not that others can't do it. If you fight in top tier competition, bro, you're not gonna be fighting 4 times a year. You need to
Mhm.
rest the body and everything else, bro. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Look how when you build in a fighter, they fighting every day, every other week. But once you up the levels of competition, do they fight that often? Nope.
No. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I kind of like bring up in reference to like the comparison of eras, because like a number of times people talk about, oh, these guys they fought like 4 or 5 or 6 times a year. Yeah, but look who they were fighting. I talk about the whole thing with like Julio Cesar Chavez, right? Yeah, he could be like 99-0, or back before that like 80-0, but he's going to have fights in Mexico against guys that may not even have 10 professional fights. So having these instances where these fighters are fighting 4 or 5 times a year at a certain level, that ain't happening anymore. Especially now, given that, as I say, everything is pretty much on TV or some type of camera or whatever it is. No, they're not going to do that,
And,
because money is going to be involved, number one, and two, you need to have that whole recovery period if you're going to have those high profile fights.
and then one thing people don't know about back in the days and now, they ain't had no choice, and we having more information now. You think if the people from back in the day had as much info we have now, they would have been fighting every day? No, they would have moved smarter.
Yep, pretty much. And the whole thing, like I said, with the money, like they ain't really had that much money behind these fights, back in the day. So they ain't had no choice but to fight like 4 or 5 or maybe 6 times a year on that aspect there. So, that's what we have in reference to, the whole joint with what happened in Ring Five, Night of the Samurai, as they themed it, right? But hey, if we see what happens there for Inoue versus Nakatani, yeah, it's going to be a super fight. It's going to be an event over in Japan, and it's going to have enough interest where people from outside of Japan that are in the boxing game will try to get make it out there. But that's just one of the fights to look forward to in 2026, and I might talk about that here later this week. We might have a midweek report before the start of 2026 to kind of like touch on that. But we're pretty much about that time here where we have, like I said, the end of the year basically when it comes to the podcast, and we review the whole year of boxing, so to speak. But we have to have our award show, right? So it's the Boxing Source 2025 award show, man. We doing it here, we doing it big, and all that type of stuff here. So uh, I got like a number of categories here, so it's gonna be a good little minute here for this. So I gotta run through this here real quick. So we gonna do this here. So we got the first category that's out there is for prospect of the year. All right. So we got the candidates here. I talked about this on Wednesday. We got the candidates here. We got first we got Kermel Moulton there as one of the nominees there. He's currently at 8-0 with 6 of those wins by way of knockout. Had a couple of fights here this year. Of course, one of the more notable young fighters that's out there, in the sport there. So we got Kermel Moulton as one of the nominees here for prospect of the year. Next one that we have on the docket is Dwight Flemings Jr., who's there with 11 record of 11-0 with 10 of those wins by way of knockout. He's had a few fights this year. We had one that was over on Barclays Center on March 1st there, so he was able to score a victory on that, and you'll have a couple of other victories here this year. Another candidate here that we have is Derek Davis. They're at 9-0 with 9 of those wins by way of knockout. He's been very active this year. As we were mentioning, as far as like the young fighters coming up, having a whole bunch of fights within the year. That is one of those fighters there. And Derek Davis has had a number of fights, whether it's there on March 1st, in June over at Norfolk. He had like one over at DC area, two pretty much two in the DC area, one in September, and then one here in November, so to speak. So he's another one of the candidates here. We also have Terra Moana, that's a heavyweight there from Australia at 9-0 with all of his wins by way of knockout. Had a stoppage victory in his latest fight. Pretty much was like last month, things like that. So he's like one of the fighters to watch there in the heavyweight division. Of course, heavyweight division is one of interest from a lot of boxing fans there. And we also have here with the nominees in Omari Jones there that has 4 wins, for all 4 wins by way of knockout. Had like his pro debut in his hometown of Orlando, Florida in March. Was able to get that early stoppage victory there, and then turn right around and had like another fight within the next month. So he's been one of those very active fighters. Also, there being a prospect. Then we have this here with our winner here. So I'm going to see here if we could go ahead and show who the winner is for the 2025 prospect of the year, and that should be Derek Scooter Davis there as the Boxing Source prospect of the year. As I mentioned there with that, having a number of fights this year, stoppage victories, almost like highlight reel stoppage victories here this year. I was pretty much at what, man, 4 of those fights that he's had. You know what I mean? So I was there for the fight in March. I was there for the fight in Norfolk. This picture here is from Norfolk. You had the thing over in DC there, the Care First Arena, and then in November at the headlining about there at Maryland Live. So yeah, Derek Scooter Davis is there as your 2025 prospect of the year. Yeah. Oh, I didn't even see this here. Shout out to Bull Rider here on here talk about the Inoue fight. I don't know, man. Hey, I don't know. They have an investigation for Naoya Inoue, but that would be a crazy story if there's something like that happening with Naoya Inoue in that fight that he had against Picasso. But like I said, 2025 prospect of the year, Derek Scooter Davis there. So that's what I had there, man. Never fold. You had anybody that you would kind of like point out as a prospect of the year or a top prospect from
Um,
2025?
I see why you pretty much picked him because he fought a lot, and he went out there, he did his thing in those fights. Some of the guys that you mentioned, you mentioned some good names in there. Amari Jones, you feel me? Ever since he went a professional, he been looking great. So yeah, I the names that you got were the names that I should have got mentioned. Yeah, I like the pick.
Where I had the whole thing in reference to like the criteria. There may be like a few fighters that might have like even less fights than these guys do, but they're already like ranked in sanctioning bodies in like the top 10 or the top 5 or something like that. And I'm like, man, you can't I can't name them like a prospect if they are already like almost top 2 or 3 in the rankings. Like people will talk about Moses Atama there as a prospect, yeah, being at 20 years old, but he's already like the number 1 ranked fighter in the WBO rankings or something like that. I'm like, man, if you fighting guys like a Dylan White or a number of notable fighters within the heavyweight division, like you pretty much like have him as a prospect. Yeah, I don't know about all that. Like I mean, even from like last year I had Abdullah Mason there as a prospect of the year, but it ended up being that given what happened here in 2025, he ends up being a WBO lightweight champion now. So that's the thing, man. Okay, yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying there. Never fold in reference to the Inoue fight. What was happening before the fight. So, hey, props to that team there for Picasso then, because sometimes the teams don't necessarily notice stuff like that happening. Before a fight. almost like how you had what was it? Remember when Nazim Richardson was in there for Shane Mosley against Antonio Margarito, and Margarito tried something. You know what I mean? So it's like, nah, y'all got to be able to wrap their hands properly and that type of stuff too. So maybe Picasso's team kind of like seeing something there with Naoya Inoue before that fight. You know what I mean? All right. So want to get to this next category here, real quick because you got a number of joints going down. So next one here is trainer of the year. This one, I don't know, man. This one was kind of tough here. There's probably gonna be something where a number of people may or may not agree with the the selection here, but this is who we have as the candidates here for trainer of the year. First off, we have Bob Santos. There, of course, he was there in the corner for Mario Barrios. He also has Luis the Twist Nunez, Isaac Lucero, and John Easter among the fighters there under his camp over in Las Vegas. Had conversations with him. He did recently open up a gym out there in Las Vegas. We also has the Perro brothers there in the heavyweight division. With one of them being a serious contender within the WBA rankings at heavyweight. So that's one trainer there to have as one of the top trainers this year. Next nomination here is Robert Garcia, who has Virgil Ortiz Jr., Bam Rodriguez, Ray Murataya, Nonito Donaire, among others, there within his stable. And, he's been one of the more notable trainers out there, in the sport, just like, Bob Santos is. So is Robert Garcia. All right. Next person that we have out there for trainer of the year is Derek Bozy Ennis. Of course, the father and trainer of Jerome Boots Ennis also has Stephen Fulton in his camp, has O'Shea Jones in the camp, Andy Cruz also in the camp, and had Jack Catterall in the camp. They're over in Philadelphia. There, Bozy's Dungeon there for Bozy Ennis. You have another candidate here is Ronnie Shields. Ronnie Shields has Joshua Edwards, of course, a young heavyweight there from Houston, has been very active this year. You have Justin Paldo, the $1 million man. You also have Andreas Katsourakis there at the 154-pound division. You have David Morrell Jr. There also in the camp over in Houston. And yes, he did have the announcement that Jamal Charlo is back there in the camp. And he does also have heavyweight Otto All-In Wall-In among the fighters there in that camp. So it's a very, very active gym over there in Texas there with Ronnie Shields. And we have the last nomination here is Andy Lee. Andy Lee has fighters like Hamza Shiraz, Ben Whitaker, Patty Donovan, Joseph Parker among those in the camp. Also with that. So, those are, the nominees there for this one. And this is who we have as the winner for trainer of the year. And that is Robert Garcia. I mean, of course, with the standout there with Bam Rodriguez, of course, being one of the fighters mentioned by many, being in the pound for pound rankings there, has 3 of the 4 major titles within his weight class. You do have Virgil Ortiz Jr. that's also undefeated there, had his latest win over Erickson Lubin. You got Ray Murataya that is currently the IBF champion there at 135 pounds that will be taking on Andy Cruz here next month. And Nonito Donaire, who had a belt here, but had a recent loss. It was a close loss, decision loss here. But hey, I just had to pretty much give props to Robert Garcia for the fighters that he has under his stable this year that's been able to perform at a great level on that front. But there's a number of candidates out there. Like I said, I had 5, and some even mentioned hey, we could have had Bomac there as one of the nominees. He won trainer of the year last year. You know what I mean? But I had it to where Robert Garcia's stable of fighters and what they were able to do this year, I had him stand out as the trainer of the year on that front. So that's what I had on that one. Shout out to Dante Boxing Talk here. Talking about prospects. Yeah, he had Keon Davis looking good in his two fights. But yeah, he needs about 4 or 5 fights this year. Yeah, we had his performance in Norfolk over, and also over in Madison Square Garden that I was able to be in hand for, and also like one fight he had over in April and things like that. So yeah, Keon Davis is another fighter to watch out for. They're in the welterweight, currently in the welterweight division. There as far as like prospects to look at for 2026. But for trainer of the year, that's why I had Robert Garcia there on that front, man. Never fold if you're still with us, man. What did you think about like for trainers this year?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm just letting you cook whenever you need me to get my 2 cents, and then you let me know. But you know me, I already said it, and you just said it. Bo Mac, feel me? 3 weight divisions moving up. It ain't no win bigger than that. Know what I'm saying? He ain't need no Crawford. Just based off what was done, and he was in the corner. Gotta give it to Bo Mac. So for me, I wouldn't give it to nobody but Bo Mac, bro. You know what I mean? I know where you went at with this. You went with the activity and what the fighters done. I respect that, but with me, I just gotta what Crawford did. Nobody else could have done that, bro. I don't see it. Probably a Usyk or something, but other than that, I don't see it.
Word, word. I mean, yeah, he definitely came through for Terrence Crawford there at Legion Stadium over there in Las Vegas, man. And man, he should have had 2 victories or something like that,
Oh yeah,
because
you
we had
talking
the
about
thing
Nelson?
with the well, not the Nelson joint. Well, the Nelson man, I don't know what was up with that referee, man. He just like said, man, I don't even know if we should be here this long. I want to end this thing like early. So that was a crazy decision there on that front. And yeah, we had the thing also with Diego Pacheco, because he had that fight against Diego
Yeah,
Pacheco as well, right? So he did have that on one front, but also uh, in that fight card in September, he had Lester
Lester.
Martinez,
Yeah, yeah.
and I felt like he should have got the decision over Christian and Billy instead of it being a draw. So you would have had two big victories there for that camp on that front. But yeah, I just thought gave more credence to Robert Garcia and what he was able to do with the fighters that he has this year for him to get Trainer of the Year on that front. All right, so all right, just moving forward here. All right, our next thing we got is upset of the year. Now, I mean, we had a few upsets here over the course of the year in boxing. You know how it goes sometimes with all of that. So we just going through a number of them, that we had on the docket. Had the nominees that I announced like earlier, over on Wednesday. You have Jorge Garcia Perez against Charles Conwell, with Conwell, being there at the 154-pound division as a contender. Some were saying that he could have been mentioned as an opponent there for the IBF champion there, Bakum Zaliev. But he has fight against Jorge Garcia, which would have been for like a eliminator of sorts within the WBO. And he went through, 12 rounds there with Garcia Perez. And Garcia Perez, had an effort, particularly in the second half of the fight, for him to get the decision victory and have him be put in position to actually fight for the WBO title there at 154 pounds against Xander Zayas. So you got Jorge Garcia Perez getting the win over Charles Conwell there as one of the nominees. Next nominee that we have up there is Rolando Rolly Romero against Ryan Garcia. You had this be the main event over in Times Square in May of this year. It was Cinco de Mayo weekend, and a lot of people were looking at it as potentially Ryan Garcia having a rematch with Devin Miles Haney, who at that same card had the victory over Jose Ramirez, right? But Rolly Romero, he's like, nah, I'm gonna go in there and I'm gonna fight my fight. And he sent that early message with the knockdown there within that round. And after that, you just seen the overall activity of Ryan Garcia just be nearly nullified for Rolly Romero to get that decision and to become eventually the WBA champion at 147 pounds. All right. Next nominee there, we got Armando Resendiz versus Caleb Plant. Now, this one, you had Caleb Plant. he was in there. This was a headline about you had in the co-feature Jamal Charlo going up against Thomas Cornflake Lamana. A lot of people were saying that, hey, with these two fights being lined up in the same card, if these two fighters win their fights, as they were like the A sides of sorts within those fights, that you would see Caleb Plant versus Jamal Charlo later in the year. Of course, people wanted to see that grudge match. But you had Jamal Charlo take care of business, get a stoppage victory over Thomas Lamana. But with Caleb Plant and Armando Resendiz was not backing down. He had a number of instances where he hurt Caleb Plant, and he was able to get the decision victory there for that win to become the interim champion there at 168 pounds. And then last nominee we have is Rene Alvarado versus Victor Morales. You have Rene Alvarado that's been one of those guys that is still is floating around in boxing, right? And had like over what 15 or so losses or whatever it was at the time, going up against Victor Morales, who was going into this bout at a record of 20 wins, 0 losses, and 1 draw. And Morales just got outboxed over the course of 10 rounds there in Anaheim, California. And it was a unanimous decision win for Rene Alvarado for him to hand Victor Morales the first loss of his professional career. All right, so with those candidates that we have out there, we have the winner for upset of the year, and I think people kind of like see this one though, and that's Armando Resendiz getting the win over Caleb Plant. Man, if you just like seen the odds there for this, it was just like Caleb Plant had a serious advantage in the cards. I mean, not necessarily in the cards, in the odds, right? Around like 20-1 to 25-1 favorite there over Armando Resendiz, with the Resendiz being around like a 10-1 or so underdog, or a 10 to 11-1 underdog. And he was able to, not necessarily back down from a number of the punches that Caleb Plant was able to land in for Resendiz, especially in the second half of the fight, was able to, wear down Caleb Plant. And given that Caleb Plant is known for, having some stamina issues or stuff like that and fatigue in the tail end of his fights, that's what you kind of like seeing here. And the amount of activity from Resendiz in the second half of the fight was enough for him to get that decision win and to become the interim champion there at 168 pounds. So I have Resendiz over Plant as the 2025 upset of the year. What you got, Never Fold?
Man, hey, that's the best guy to pick. You know what I'm saying? Because first thing first, nobody asked Caleb Plant to fight Resendez. That's a sparring partner. So he cherry picked him and he lost. And you gotta pick Resendez, because other than that, it ain't no other choice. Because Caleb Plant was supposed to go there, secure the bag, and then go and fight Charlo, and he fumbled the bag and he lost to Resendez. And yeah, that's the best pick.
Yeah, man. Going into the whole thing for, um, promoting the fight and that type of stuff. I was like on for a couple of the conference calls. There was like one eventful moment of a conference call where you had Caleb Plant that was on, and he was talking about the fight with Armando Resendiz, and he almost like like
It's in the past.
well, he kind of like dismissed Thomas Lamana when they were supposed to have, Lamana's fight with Jamal Charlo,
Yeah.
and apparently like Lamana was still on the call, and
Hey,
they
you
had
gotta
like a
pay
serious
attention
back
to
and
me.
forth going on. That was funny, man. That was absolutely funny on that front.
Yeah, yeah.
But like you said, with Caleb Plant, and Armando Sandies being former sparring partners, it was like something where, even though Caleb Plant kind of like was talking like, "Hey man, I can't overlook Armando Resendiz and talk about the fight with Jamal Charlo or potential fight with Jamal Charlo, whatever it is." it seemed like his performance level was, well, it wasn't up to par, so to say the least. There, but even with that being said, Armando Resendiz was able to give the effort that he was able to do there on that front in order to outwork Caleb Plant over the course of those 12 rounds there. So you had, like I said, on one front a couple of years ago with Armando Resendiz being stopped by Elijah Garcia, right? And then here we are, like almost like 2 years later, and he gets this win over Caleb Plant here for that interim championship there at 168 pounds. So that's why you gotta like have Jose Resendiz there as your guy. You know what I mean? Just real quick shout out to those that are listening in on Instagram and stuff like that. I think it had shout out to my guy, the Candyman John Easter. In the building there, he was able to check in and chop it up and things like that too. So shout out to everyone that's able to listen in through Instagram. But we also live on Rumble and on YouTube and something like that. And I don't know if this thing, I tried to see if I could put it on Kick, but I don't even know if it's, working on that or whatnot. But we still are, out here cooking and things like that here. So, with that being said, that is our pick for upset of the year. We're just trying to move forward, move forward, move forward. This next one here we got is for round of the year. Now this one's gonna be pretty interesting. All right. Here we go with the nominees. First up, we got what Callum Smith versus Joshua Boatsi, round 6. Now we had this be part of the fight card or whatnot. There for what February, right? And February 22nd, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. This fight here in the light heavyweight division for an interim title. And this one was a good scrap between Bawatsi going in there undefeated against Callum Smith, of course, who was a world champion there within the super middleweight division, but kind of like fell short when he came to facing Archer Beterbiev there in the light heavyweight division last year. But we're trying to get back in the mix here in the light heavyweight division, going up against an undefeated fighter there in Joshua Buatsi. And in the 6th round, they had a good little exchange, particularly in the last minute of the 6th round there. And that's kind of like what stood out for that particular fight before you had Callum Smith be en route to having a decision win there to kind of like climb up there in the light heavyweight rankings. And he potentially could have that fight secured against David Morrell Jr. In 2026 there as I think for the WBC interim title or something like that there on that front. So that's one of the candidates there. Next nominee here we got, I did mention this fight earlier, and this one was part of good little scrap, and that is Christian and Billy versus Lester Martinez in round 10. This was for the WBC interim championship there at 168 pounds. Christian and Billy was going in there as the WBC interim champion. Lester Martinez also in there undefeated. I was looking forward to this particular bout on that card. I thought that was the one to watch out for actually in the whole card, right? And just being there live at at Allegiant Stadium, this fight was a good scrap, particularly in the second half of the fight. But the one with round 10 kind of like stood out to me. But it was something because over the course of that fight, the crowd, even though there was a majority of people that were there already, before the main event, of course, because he had like a co-feature bout that was going to happen even before Billy versus Martinez. But this one right here, I was like, oh man, they going at it. And I was like, it took until round 9 and round 10 for the crowd to like actually catch up because they really went at it. And yeah, now the crowd finally reacted to it. But I'm like, where was y'all in like round 4, round 5 or something? You know what I mean? But that round right there, good scrap between the two. Very crazy fight. You know what I mean? There, but ended up in a draw. But I'd say that was like one of the better rounds of the year there with that one. Next one here that we have is Devontae Davis versus Lamont Roach Jr. round 9. Of course, it was March 1st, Barclays Center. There, fight between two guys within, the same, almost within the same area. That had a lot of familiarity with each other, over the course of from amateurs to pros and that type of thing. Yeah. Was a good fight going into the ninth round, and then early in the ninth round, a lot of people saw something that they didn't think that they would see, and that is Tank Davis going down to one knee there during round 9. And we all know what ended up being ruled there on that front, and the round continued, and you still had them going back and forth to where it ended up being a close round at the time. But given the decision that happened live, that affected the overall result of that fight. All right, so you have there Devontae Tank Davis versus Lamont Roach Jr. round 9, and next candidate there is David Benavidez versus David Morrell Jr. round 4. This one, like, I was there live February 1st, T-Mobile Arena. One of the more anticipated fights, at least for me, as I would say, whether a media person or a fight fan, this one was one of those fights I was looking forward to. David Benavidez there and David Morrell Jr. there, both undefeated. Benavidez being one of the guys mentioned as a pound for pound fighter going into this fight. Having this success that he had at super middleweight, now competing there at light heavyweight. David Morrell Jr. also was there at super middleweight, going up to light heavyweight in this bout, and this one looked like to be like one of the fights that David Benavidez was going to have to work in order to get the win. And in round 4, you did see that where David Benavidez has ended up like had a cut, on the side of his eye. David Morrell was, getting some work in a little bit in that round, but also you've seen David Benavidez respond to that and kind of like show his grit and toughness on that front. But by the end of the round, you kind of like seen that there was a lot of tension within that fight because a lot of people hasn't necessarily seen Benavidez in that type of moment, so to speak, when it comes to the overall momentum, either like not being in his favor or being in the balance. So that round 4 kind of like shown that there was like a lot of tension going into like round 5 on in reference to that particular fight, right? But this is what we have here as the pick for round of the year. And I mean, come on, man. It like to me, it was pretty much obvious to me at this front. Like I said, watching it live, you seen what was going on, good back and forth between the two over the course of those first, 6, 7, 8 rounds, and then you seen that moment that happened there in round 9, and I'm like there live, and I'm like, oh snap, what just happened? Like he just went down on one knee, and then of course what happened after that, there with the corner there for Tank Davis and stuff like that. So almost like, man, that was just an absolute insane moment there, and as I was mentioning before, it completely affected the result of the fight by what first the referee and the folks there within the athletic commission, what they decided there on that front. So I have Devontae Tank Davis versus Lamar Roach Jr. round 9, a boxing source round of the year. What you got, Neverfold?
Man, hey, as much you could try to go against the pick, you have no choice but to pick that one. But the two of the picks for me is Javante Davis, Lamont Roach, and Benavidez Morel, man. Because like you mentioned, Benavidez, both his eyelids got cut from Morel, and he got dropped too. Whether some people were saying it wasn't he didn't get dropped or not. His gloves touched the ground. That's a knockdown. I don't agree with the gloves touching the ground. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that should be a knockdown, but those were the two fights for me, and I couldn't go against the Lamont Javante fight.
Yeah, man. I mean given what was like on the line for it, given the build up for it. Um, of course, a lot of people had the expectations that they did going into the fight. Not necessarily knowing about Lamont Roach Jr., but when you're seeing the fight happening live, and people kind of like seeing like, oh, what's really going on here. And then that particular moment, I'm telling you, that was like one of the moments of the year, at the time, because it's like you have a fighter in Tank Davis that some people kind of like felt like was as he had the nickname the one, and being like one of the more popular fighters in boxing. So it's like, they, fans go there to see Tank Davis and see if he's able to, get a knockout and have a great moment of sorts there. But Lamont Roach Jr. wasn't having any part of it, and you kind of like seen that from him, ever since the fight was, lined up, so he kind of like went in there, was not intimidated by one stretch of imagination, and performed like many people like didn't really expect, and as many say, like the result got taken away from him, and given what happened in the months after this particular fight, you kind of see like how that round pretty much shaped a number of things that happened over the course of the year in boxing, because that changed a lot. I mean, it changed a lot of things there when it comes to the sport of boxing. So yeah, you got to have this stand out as a thing there for round of the year. You know what I mean? All right, so just moving forward here, got this next candidate here. Gonna go through this real quick because we got a lot, still got a number of things to go. All right, so next category we have is knockout of the year. Yeah, we had a good number of candidates for knockout of the year. Um, just being honest, we had like a few strong candidates here for this one. All right. I'm going to read these nominees here. One of these nominees here, we got Fabio Wardley over Justice Huni. They're in the heavyweight division. Fabio Wardley, there in that particular fight against Justice Huni, was getting outboxed for the majority of that fight. And a lot of people were saying, like, hey, man, I don't know if he's going to get through this if it goes to the cards. And then in the 10th round, there Fabio Wardley ends up sticking him with a solid shot, sticking Huni with a solid shot, putting him down to the canvas. Ended up getting a count out for him to get that win. And as you see, he was able to move on and have the fight against Joseph Parker or whatnot. And hey, look at where we're at. You know what I mean? Next candidate that we have here, also in the heavyweight division, is Alexander Usyk versus Daniel Dubois, Wembley Stadium. Alexander Usyk, man, hey, talking about I would say one of the better performances of the year. That was Alexander Usyk, man. Like he cooked Daniel Dubois, man. That was barbecue chicken. Like the saying goes, that was barbecue chicken. But he scored that first knockdown on Daniel Dubois. And then that next one where Daniel Dubois looked like he was reaching out to land a punch, and he was out of range because like Usyk just did like a little bit of a slip, and then Usyk came back with a just a serious hook that just crushed Daniel Dubois, boy. And I was like, damn, yo, and knocked Daniel Dubois out. And so he became, of course, undisputed once again, as Dubois had the IBF belt there. But Usyk, man, he just like really crushed him on that one, right? All right, so that's another candidate. Third candidate there in the heavyweight division, Dave Allen versus Johnny Fisher. One of those scraps there in the UK. Dave Allen, of course, is like one of the fan favorites over there in the UK, going up against Johnny Fisher. And Dave Allen, was able to, overwhelm Johnny Fisher to one point, and then just had him knocked down on his feet before Johnny Fisher like hit face first on the canvas. All right, so you have that as another nominee there for knockout of the year. You also have Frank Martin versus Rancis Barthélemy. We just a recent add in, and come on, man, like Frank Martin landing that left to the job, man, and man, live, I thought Rancis Barthélemy was like done, done, done. Right? I was like, man, it almost seemed like he just completely broke Rancis Barthélemy, man. It was insane. All right. And then you also have here as nominee Brian Norman Jr. versus Jin Sasaki. There with Brian Norman Jr. defending the WBO welterweight title at the time against Jin Sasaki in Japan. And great setup by Brian Norman Jr. Going to the body, landing to the body with one punch, and then just fainting to the body, and then coming up with a hook, boom, and just sends Jin Sasaki into the shadow realm there to get that knockout win. And so, with that being said, you have a couple of strong candidates there for knockout of the year, but I mean, yeah, I just couldn't have it. The winner not be Brian Norman Jr. over Jin Sasaki. I mean, you kind of like see if you're watching live, you see like this scene right here, man. And given what was happening like immediately after this knockout with Jin Sasaki, not even knowing what what happened in the past couple of weeks, that just shows you like how vicious this knockout was, man. Like he was just done there on that front, man. So had to have that in, and I think at that point when this happened, like people were saying immediately that this was like knockout of the year. So it was basically anything after that had to compare to this. You know what I mean? And we did have a couple of candidates, and like I said, there with for me that one with Frank Martin over Rancis Barthélemy was a pretty strong one, but it just didn't, surpass this. This was just absolutely brutal right here on this front. So, what you got on that one, Neverfold?
Yeah, man. Hey, with the Sasaki knockout, bro. First of all, Norman was setting him up the whole time, going to the body, setting him up, and then till he landed the shot. But what happened after? Jin Sasaki ain't know what happened. He lost his memory for a month, so
Yeah,
that's crazy. I'm still waiting on the updates on him because ever since we heard that he was dealing with memory loss for a month, we haven't heard any updates. Hopefully he good and all that, but that knockout was nasty. And then with the Fabio Wardley, like he got a punching power too. But the
hmm,
thing is, well, what he did was he hit a game winner. He was losing, getting cooked.
yeah,
That's a game winner, but with the Jin Sasaki one, you can't go against it. And then with the Usyk Du Bois could have kept going. He quit like he did previously. So, know what I'm saying? So you got to go with the Jin Sasaki. That was a good
yeah, yeah. I mean, I know that was a perfect shot there by Alexander Usyk and Daniel Boy
one.
went down. But you see Daniel Boy there on the canvas, he was just sitting there, and I'm like, do I want to get up? No, I don't
Nah, he
want to get
don't
up.
want to get up,
I don't
bro.
want to get up, dog. I don't
Don't,
want to get up,
dude.
man.
He was hurt enough to where he knew he got hurt, but it sounded like he couldn't got up. He waited, then looked at the corner. Cause if a fighter looking at the corner, that means
Hmm.
you trying to have eye contact. Should I keep going? Should I? He waited to the knife count and got up and just. You seen
Yeah,
even Usyk could have ran into him. If he was really messed up, he would have automatically ran into Usyk, right? None of
yep,
that happened. So yeah, Du Bois, he got a little quitter mentality in him. He won't go far unless he get rid of that. Cause if you don't want to go above and beyond for certain stuff, I just don't see Du Bois going far. Cause whenever he adversities in his face, he fold.
yeah, man. I mean, and that that right there was just like almost a similar instance to the
The
first
first one. Yep.
fight. I mean, and especially with that one because like he had scored. Many people felt like that was a knockdown on Alexander Usyk,
Yeah, it definitely was.
and yeah, it definitely was right. But my thing about it is whether it was a knockdown or not, you knew that you had him hurt. So, and you were doing very well, up until that particular point. So why not continue that momentum, going through the rest of the fight? And you kind of like seeing all of that momentum and stuff go out the window, you know what I mean, for him to eventually get stopped in that one. And then here, but this rematch though, oh man, he was just cooked. He was absolutely cooked. It it was almost like nothing he could do. It was like he was two steps slower in everything when it came to fighting Alexander Usyk on that day. It was just bad. It was bad overall. But yeah, but I had, like I said, I had the thing there with Frank Martin over Rancis Barthélemy as number two, because man, seeing that live, I was like, goodness gracious, man, I thought, I like seriously, I thought Rancis Barthélemy was done. Like how
Yeah,
you saw the
bro,
thing there with
probably
Jen
not.
Sasaki, that's the same thing I thought there with Rancis Barthélemy seeing that live. That was just insane because he didn't move. I was like, goodness gracious, man. But yeah, you got to have the thing there with Brian Norman Jr. over Jen Sasaki as the 2025 knockout of the year. All right, so we got this next candidate or next category here. This is something that I had from last year. This is called failure of the year, and failure of the year means that hey, you not only had like a bad year, but you had like bad moments over the course of 2025, right? So here, with the nominees, we had like three nominees. One of them is Dimitri Bivol. Yeah, I did say that Dimitri Bivol was able to get the win over Artur Beterbiev by decision to become, at the time, the undisputed champion there at 175 pounds. But after that, you had the whole little instance back and forth between, Bivol and David Benavidez at the time, because Benavidez was the mandatory challenger through the WBC, and them ordering that, they kind of like said, hey, either you have that fight against David Benavidez, or we see what happens here with Artur Beterbiev to see if they have a third fight. So he ends up having the WBC belt relinquished, and then they say that they'll try to have this thing with the third fight with Beterbiev, but that doesn't end up happening because, well, one, it said that Dimitri Bivol had a back injury. I'm like, well, okay, that's something there. But two is that you don't even have a fight for the rest of the year, and people are thinking that you weren't even going to be having a fight with Artur Beterbiev, that you were going to end up defending one of your belts against a mandatory challenger, which nobody was any remotely interested in. So you kind of like have Dimitri Bivol go from like one high to like a low here within the end of this year. So that's one candidate. All right. Next nominee here we have is Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Um, you go up against Jake Paul. It's one thing to go up against Jake Paul and have a performance that you would have, but end up having Jake Paul defeat you by decision. And yeah, you did have a couple of moments there in that one, in whatever it was, but still have Jake Paul winning by decision. It's another thing to have it happen that 4 days later or so, you end up getting arrested by ICE or whatever it is because of your potential involvement with a cartel in Mexico, and you get deported to Mexico. That that was one of the craziest stories within boxing this year, having what was happening from Saturday when they had the fight against Jake Paul to Wednesday, to where you get arrested by ICE and get sent over to Mexico. So that's another nominee. Third one here, last nominee is Janibek Alhamdulillah. Come on, man. You're a unified champion there at 160 pounds. A number of people view you as the top fighter or whatever it is at 160 pounds. You were kind of like initially viewed to have a unification bout with Carlos Adames, who was a WBC champion at 160 pounds, but that fight doesn't end up getting worked out. Then you get not only you get a shot against Erislandy Lara for the WBA title, you're on in a pay per view. It will be a pay per view card that was one of the better, cards as far as like matchups initially for the year. And days before you're supposed to be in that bout against Erislandy Lara, you end up having a positive test that ends up having you scrapped from that bout against Lara, and Lara goes in there and has a fight against Gonzalez, and we all saw what happened there in those 12 rounds with that. So Janet Alamhala is another candidate there for failure of the year. And well, I mean, for me, man, the winner. I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry, but he like this one to me. Come on, man. This was like I said, it was like wildest stories of 2025. You go from having a fight against Jake Paul, and then it like say, hey, wait, we got to get him on charges for being involved in the Sinaloa cartel. So I'm like, wait a minute, how you gonna have something like this be at this serious, and yet you allow him to compete in a sporting event, a major sporting event of sorts in California? So it's almost like y'all saying, hey, all right, we know we got this on him, but yo, let's just wait. Let's just wait. Let's see what happens in this fight first. And then after this fight, let's get him. Like, come on, man. Are you kidding me? So I'm sorry. But you go from losing to Jake Paul to days later end up getting arrested and then sent out to Mexico. Come on. That has to be why Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. fortunately is the 2025 failure of the year. I mean, come on, man. That ooh, oh boy. Never fall. Hey, you got anything on this?
Man, it's crazy, bro. Like I was just saying in the chat, man, this category by far the hardest one to pick.
Mm-hmm.
B-Vol, he trying to age out and he's moving funny, right? Because
Yeah,
Better Biev ain't want to do the second match. He was forced to do that, right? He let that
yeah.
be known publicly. So instead of him doing the surgery automatically as soon as he done, he wait months after, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you got the Chavez Jr. by far the dumbest one. It's like, bro, you can be in a sport of boxing making millions of dollars, not even fighting top tier competition. He literally just fought Jake Paul. This dude was out there, so they say he was the enforcer, beating up members of the cartel members. Like, bro, how dumb can you be? So that Chavez one, you gotta go with that one. That dude is by far the biggest idiot in boxing, bro.
Hey,
Great.
like like you said, man, it was so hard to pick, man. It's too many idiots. But shout out to my guy L Dub, man. He had a few other candidates that I ain't even named. He had Tank Davis, he had Keyshawn Davis, and he has Ben Shalom. Now, I mean, I couldn't, have I didn't put in a promoter there as a candidate. You don't usually have it, but hey, Tank Davis, of course, as I mentioned there, having a draw against Lamont Rose Jr., and then having the whole thing as far as like delay after delay after delay, then announcing that he's fighting Jake Paul, and then like close to when that fight is supposed to be happening in November, that whole fight gets scrapped. So you only have one fight there for Tank Davis. You know what I mean? And like I was saying there, and then Keyshawn Davis. I mean, hey, yeah, you did have him winning, the WBO lightweight title in February over at the theater in Madison Square Garden, right? But after that, they had everything set up for him. Top Rank had a plan for him, from the previous year, going into this year, having them fight for a world title, which they did. He was able to fight for it, was able to win it there, against Dennis Berinchik. Then have a hometown fight, so they had that hometown fight all scheduled for him and everything like that. And then Norfolk ends up being overweight, man. And hey, that whole memory, there being out there in Norfolk for fight week, and having that, being over, having them be overweight, that was crazy
You
because
know what's crazy about that, right?
word,
This guy he was headlining a card in his city. Dudes like AI, Mike Vick came to support a whole bunch of people. This guy, he was at his own fight eating popcorn when he came in overweight. I don't know if anybody else seen that. He was at
yeah,
that fight eating
yep, I
popcorn.
was there. Listen, that weigh in was crazy because you had the whole thing with the press conference. Mike Vick was there at the press conference. Had the whole thing with the weigh-in. Mike Vick was there at the weigh-in, and in that moment there when they said that that Keyshawn Davis was overweight, you had of course the promoter there, Bob Aaron, be like, "That's motherfucker," or something like that. You know what I mean? And the wild part about it is that even with the whole thing about Keyshawn Davis being overweight, Edwin De Los Santos still wanted to have that fight. It was De Los Santos promoter that said no. Like he wasn't gonna, like have that, man. And hey, shout out to my guy Smitty here in the building, man. Hey, he was out there, for fight week 2, man. He said, hey, it was a waste of a week, man. You know what I mean? So, hey, we was all hyped up. We was all getting ready, having Keyshawn Davis in there, having Keon Davis and Kelvin Davis there, DB3 having the fights, and they had that whole little week that they were doing stuff within the city of Norfolk, and this whole thing goes down, and it's like, oh man, and that day was like absolutely insane because we was just going around like we didn't know if the fight was still going to be happening, and then it ended up being like a no go, and then that kind of like crushed a lot of people's hopes and things like that over in Norfolk. And as a result, you had a number of people like relinquish their tickets or ask for refunds. And then you had the whole thing that was going down before the fight card with the Davis brothers. And then, of course, what happened on that day at Norfolk there at Scope Arena with Kelvin Davis losing to Nahir Albright. And then what happened in the locker room afterwards? Oh, man. Hey, listen, man. Yeah, hey, I'm sorry I didn't have Keyshawn Davis in there as a candidate initially, but that was crazy. There, hey, yeah, you had to. Oh, also, man, he had that thing with Carmel Moulton. Yeah, I didn't know what happened with all of that too, man. Because I think that fight was supposed to be like in New Jersey or Pennsylvania or something. And he was like 14 pounds overweight. Talking about Carmel Moulton there on that front, man. But yeah, that whole scene there over in Norfolk this summer, yeah, that was crazy, yo. That was crazy. But you had the whole thing there, like I said, man. I had Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. as a 2025 failure of the year. But the crazy part is Julio Cesar Chavez is fighting on January 24th in Mexico. L Dub is saying that. So that is crazy work. But hey man, we did have a number of candidates there, but hey, I'm sorry, I just had to have Julio Cesar Chavez there as failure of the year. Shout out to everyone here that's listening here live, here through the multiple apparatuses that we have this on live through. And if you're catching the replay here, through audio or video, we shout to you there also. All right, just getting through this here. All right, we got event of the year. This one, it's not just about the main event. It's also about the build up to the main event. The undercard, will have also some influence to it and things like that too, right? But we had like 5 candidates here for event of the year. One of them is Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Ben 1. Okay. This one, of course, was years in the making. They were supposed to have this a couple of years ago. Conor Ben ended up messing all of that up, being testing positive, for banned substance or whatever it is. So when it was originally scheduled, that ended up getting scrapped. Then they ended up having the fight take place earlier this year, and we all saw what happened there in the initial press conference there. Chris Eubank Jr. going in there and just slapping him with an egg. I was like, oh man, that just had it to where that grudge match was going to be really, really, really good. Looking forward to that. And it ended up being the point where Chris Eubank Jr. was able to get the decision victory on that front. Yes, he did have a rematch this year where Conor Ben ended up getting a win in the rematch, but given the first fight and the build up for that first fight, that's what made it crazy. Next nominee that we have here is David Benavidez versus David Morrell Jr. like I said, you had these fighters that were contending there in the um, super middleweight division. Of course, with Benavidez being a world champion there at super middleweight, you did have Morrell, being like an interim champion there within both super middleweight and light heavyweight. But this fight was definitely anticipated there on that front, and you had a couple of great fights there on that particular fight card. So that is why you have the thing there with David Benavidez and David Morrell Jr. That particular event or fight card there as one of the candidates. And the funny thing is that you also have another fight card that was on here that is also a candidate for event of the year, and that is David Benavidez versus Anthony Yard. What happened there in November 22nd in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Yeah, you did have a number of key fighters involved in that one. There with David Benavidez versus Anthony Yard, you did have Bam Rodriguez on that card. You did have Brian Norman Jr. versus Devin Haney. You did also have Sam Noakes and Abdullah Mason on that card as well, which that Mason versus Noakes, that would have been one of those other candidates that some could say would have been a fight of the year candidate. So you did have a number of either big fights or highly anticipated fights on that particular fight card. So that is why you did have that as one of the nominees. Another one here, I did mention it here for like round of the year, but as overall card, you had Tank Davis versus Lamont Rhodes Jr. there at the Barclays Center March 1st. Um, just with that main event itself, you did have the whole thing there with the co-feature bout. You had Gary Antoine Russell. They're also involved in that. That was able to have the win that he had over Jose Raul Valenzuela. You had the Alberto Puello versus Sandro Martin fight that was actually surprisingly a good fight. All right, given the size of Puello and Martin, you would think putting them two in the ring together wouldn't necessarily have a good mix, but it ended up being surprisingly good. And you also did have UNS Tejas versus Julian J. Rock Williams as part of the major fight card in that one. And then you have there as one of the nominees is the Canelo Alvarez versus Terrence Crawford in Las Vegas Allegiant Stadium, the super fight there of 2025. I did mention one of the fights there that you did have on it with Lester Martinez and Christian and Billy as that one. You did also have what was that like a rematch on that card there in the 154-pound division. There was Surrey Borchuk against Brandon Adams, and you had Callum Walsh against Fernando Vargas as part of the major fight card, and then that Muhammad Ali Kell versus Travis Crawford opening that main card. Just being honest with you, I don't even know why they even did that, but I mean they wanted to feature Muhammad Ali Kell there on that front. But we're trying to see here what we have as the winner for event of the year here, and to me, kind of like have a bias on this, but David Benavidez versus David Morrell Jr. That fight card for event of the year. It wasn't just that particular fight that was a really a highly anticipated fight, and had those moments of like tense moments, right? But you had man, that fight that you had with Isaac Cruz and Angel Fierro, on this here, that was a very good bout. You had the rematch between Brandon Figueroa against Stephen Fulton on there. You had Jesus Ramos versus Jason Rosario on this card. The Mirko Cuello versus Christian Olivo fight before the main card was a really close battle that ended up being won by Cuello in the last round. It ended up was stopped by the referee, but it was a controversial stoppage because Olivo had the lead in the scorecards, and I felt like he was winning the fight going into the 10th round. And yeah, you did have the knockdown scored on Olivo, but you got to be able to give him the chance to see if he'll be able to finish out the round because on the cards he was winning. But referee just had the fight stopped and gave the win for Milko Quay on that. But like being there live February 1st and having those fights out there, and the last one, man, I was like, nah, man, this was like the event of the year for me. There with you know Benavidez versus Morrell. Like a lot of people may say, like it would be Canelo versus Crawford, given the magnitude of the main event and the location, and having the amount of people be there for that main event. But for me, it's like that was the main event was it. Like outside of that, you really didn't have much else. For me, I had to put like every element of either the build up to the fight, the co-feature bouts, like all of that had to be a factor there. So that's why I had Benavides versus Morrell be over all of those other nominees there for the event of the year on that front. Never fold. What you got?
Man, bro, you couldn't have picked a better event, dog. Before the fight, it was funny. Like, bro, that fight was so funny. The build up, belts being thrown, all type of stuff being said. Like, they had to be separated, bro. And then the fight, they went at it. Then you got the Stephen Fulton that pulled up in some Tims and some shorts.
He had
Know what
some
I'm
short,
saying?
he had
So
some
like
jean
the
shorts, yo.
yeah.
That was
So
crazy.
the fights was good on that card. You got Cruz and Fierro. They went at it. Know what I'm saying? So I don't see nobody else picking the other anything but this, because it's like the Crawford fight. It's only Crawford and Canelo. There's nothing else after that, and then Billy. But the press conference was so. The second press conference was good. So for
Hmm.
me, bro, that Benavidez and Morrell, I want to see them go at it again, just so I could see the build up. That's how fun it was, bro.
Yeah. Hey, you talk about that thing where they were had the face off in Miami. I think it was in Miami, and the belt was thrown and all that type of stuff. And then after that, though, they had that press conference after the whole little workout. And what was it? David Burrell Jr. was talking about David Benavidez being like RoboCop and doing like a
Oh yeah.
yo. They had everybody. They got everybody. Even Benavidez. They got Benavidez too. But yeah, leading
He was
into
mad. He was mad.
yeah, he was bad,
He was
bro.
like, when I beat you up, am I gonna be a RoboCop? Something like that.
Yeah, yeah, man. He's like, and they had the whole thing with the the episodes leading into it. He's like, man, yeah, after I beat him, like nobody is gonna know David Morrell Jr. And then fight week out there, Las Vegas, like they was going at it. Cruz and Fierro was going at it. Like you said, you had the rematch with Figueroa and Fulton.
Yo, you know what's crazy?
Man,
That fight was so crazy. Benavidez and Morel promoter was going at Louis the Cubas
yeah, no, because it was basically
post fight press conference.
Benavidez and Louis the Cuba Senior. That was the whole joint that was happening in the press conference and fight week. Yo, he was like Benavidez was going at him like nonstop, and then like Louis the Cuba Senior was like fuming through
Yeah,
the
he was
whole
mad.
week,
He was
right?
mad.
And then you had the fight, and like I was saying with that round of the year candidate, and I'm like, man, and then just going through that fight live, like just seeing it there live, covering it there live, I was like, nah, man, this is like, how fans would say, like, this is boxing right here. Like that's what we saw there in that fight card February 1st in T-Mobile Arena, right? And then you go to the post-fight press conference, and hey, Benavidez and Morrell like gave each other props like immediately after the fight, man, because they knew they was in a fight, and they got the thing there. Benavidez getting the decision win and everything like that, and you had a whole joint where David Morrell and them speaking. Then David Benavidez comes in, and Benavidez gives some props and everything like that. But then Louis the Cuban
Back at it.
is still going at him. I was like, yo, what is going on here? Oh my God, yo. And the funny part about it was, right, when the Cubans was still talking, shout out to my guy Ronnie Shields. Shout out to the trainer Ronnie Shields. He was like tapping there. Louis the Cuban Senior was like, okay, that's it. Let's go home. It was funny as shit, yo. Oh man, Yeah, that's why I was like, nah, it's oh goodness gracious, man. Oh, that's why I said like, yo, that had to be the event of the year on that front, man. Shout out to Late Chicken here. Bull Rider Game Farm ass said, is the coach to blame for fighter not making weight? You talk about like Bomac and Keyshawn. Well, like I said, man, like you really don't take care of fighters' weight, especially when they're off, fighter out of camp. Remember, like he had the fight in February, pretty much February 14th, there against Dennis Berinchik for the WBO lightweight title. And hey, the thing is like one at that time, Keyshawn pretty much knew what the plan was. Like for me, the fighters know what either promoters or managers or whatever what they have planned out for them. So if you knew that, hey, if you get this win against Dennis Berinchik and become the WBO lightweight title, we're gonna push to have you fight in your hometown. So you already know what you're looking forward to. You know, it's just a matter of if you're able to keep yourself within weight. You know, and at that time he wasn't able to do that. For me, just being honest, I think they they wanted to have him have the defense of the lightweight title there in his hometown, but I didn't really think that just in hindsight and being, as they say, Monday morning quarterback, I didn't think that he really could get to 135 again because if you look at him in his fight against Dennis Berinchik, man, nah. If he made 135 for that Dennis Berinchik fight, that should have been it. But hey, they wanted to have that big event, have him defend the title there in his hometown. So, to try to make the most of it, but it just didn't necessarily happen on that front. So he didn't have that. All right. Got to move forward here. Next up we have is a comeback fighter of the year. This kind of like goes to fighters that may have had like a bad year or was inactive for some time and then was able to get back in the ring and have a good performance or a great performance, and that's how they're able to be a candidate for comeback fighter of the year. First nominee there is Emmanuel Dappy John Pacquiao. Yes, Manny Pacquiao there as a candidate there for comeback fighter of the year. Yes, he did have exhibition matches and things like that, but he was out of the paint or out of the pro game since 2021 with his loss to Yordenis Ugas. And the crazy thing is, yes, he was able to be nominated and be inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in the summer. And then a month later or so, he has the fight against Mario Barrios for the WBC Welterweight Championship and was really close to winning that bout against Mario Barrios to become the oldest welterweight champion, breaking his own record, there on that front, right? So that's why you have Manny Pacquiao there as one of the nominees. Next nominee is Devin Haney. Devin Haney was able to get this win over Brian Norman Jr. on November 22nd to become the WBO welterweight champion. Given what happened last year, especially immediately after the result of last year against Ryan Garcia, where at the time it was going to be viewed as a decision loss for Devin Haney, and it would have been the first loss of his professional career. Initially he was like acting like he didn't lose or anything like that, and he kind of like, deleted it, so to speak, from his memory. Then you had the whole thing about lawsuits and that type of stuff. But eventually, he gets redemption for that. They rescind that loss from his record. Then he has the bout that he has against Jose Carlos Ramirez in May. Gets the decision win there. Has a knockdown scored against Ryan Norman Jr. early in the fight and goes to a decision win to become the WBO welterweight champion. Next nominee that we have there is Holly Holm. Holly Holm didn't have a professional fight since May of 2013. 2013, right? And the whole thing is that after that she was inactive. She had been also inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame, but turned around and had a fight against Yolanda Vega in June of this year and was able to get the win and hand Vega her first loss. And so she is another candidate there for comeback fighter of the year. That's crazy. You have and you're inactive for 12 years, and then be able to get a unanimous decision win there. But we had to see if we could pick a winner here. Someone mentioned Keith Thurman as a potential nominee there. Now, if he would have had to fight against Tim Zhu and was able to get the win, or if he was able to have the fight against Sebastian Fundora, if Fundora didn't get injured, then he would have been a for sure nominee there and probably could have won. But nope, he wasn't on there. So with that being said, the winner here is Devin Miles Haney as the Boxing Source 2025 Comeback Fighter of the Year. As I mentioned, having his two wins this year against Jose Carlos Ramirez, and he was also potentially an opponent for Teofimo Lopez, but wasn't able to get that fight, but was able to secure this fight against Brian Norman Jr., right? And was that being said, was able to win the WBO welterweight championship on November 22nd. And so that is why Devin Haney is the Boxing Source 2025 Comeback Fighter of the Year. Are you on there, Neverfold? You got something on it?
Yeah. So, yeah, comeback fighter of the year. You got to give it to Devin Haney because with how people was saying that he was over with, he came back. Um, he fought against Ramirez the way he wanted to fight him, and then against B Norm, a lot of people picked him get knocked out, and he actually got knocked down in that fight. And you got to speak the truth when the truth needs to be spoken. Devin Haney showed that he still got it, and for me, he got to be fighter of the year. He proved the doubters wrong. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, man. Yeah, you definitely proved the doubters wrong because I was one of those doubters, man. I was one of those doubters because I thought Brian Norman Jr. was gonna have enough there to wear down, and then actually I said I thought he was going to stop Devin Haney. But
Yeah.
given what was happening there early in the fight and early in the second round, landing the hooks there early, and then another hook to put down Brian Norman Jr. And it was just to the point where I thought the footwork of Brian Norman Jr. was going to be something there in his bout against Devin Haney, but it wasn't. And Devin Haney was able to use like proper spacing, range, distance, and all that type of stuff there in the last part of the rounds to where Brian Norman Jr. just couldn't really get to him to really affect Devin Haney there. You know what I mean? And so with that being said, that is why I do have Devin Haney as the comeback fighter of the year. Shout out to my brother Joseph Herod in the building from War Week Boxing, checking in here for the Boxing Source Award Show. All right, moving forward, we got a few more nominees or categories left. Here we got women's fight of the year. All right, so we got a number of fights here that we got for women's fight of the year, and I did name a few nominees for this one, but I also actually had it in a writing candidate of sorts there, right? All right, so with that being said, this is what we got here. First, we got Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano 3. So that was, of course, one of the highest anticipated bouts there in women's boxing, headlining a fight card, all women's fight card in Madison Square Garden this summer. There, so you had like all women's fights there, top to bottom. In this one, of course, being the third installment between these two fighters. There with Katie Taylor eventually getting the decision there to, well, have all three fights, all three wins by decision for Katie Taylor. All right. So you do have that. You also, had on that fight card, right? You did have Savannah Marshall versus Shadeja Green as one of the nominees for Fight of the Year. This is within that super middleweight division, unified super middleweight titles. Savannah Marshall, there of course is the notable fighter there from the amateurs. I had a fight against Clarissa Shields earlier in his pro career, had the win over Clarissa Shields in the amateurs, but ended up losing to Clarissa in the pros. Then you have Shadeja Green there going in there as a WBO world champion there as super middleweight. Did have her lone loss to Franchon Cruz-Azern, so she was getting on her way back. Had the win to become the WBO champion. Had a decision win of sorts in the fight card last year in AT&T Stadium, headlined by Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson. But there were a number of people that felt like Shadeja Green may not get this win over Savannah Marshall, but she was able to get a decision win on that front there to become unified champion in the super middleweight division. Next candidate here, we had Mayeli Flores versus Nazarena Romero. They're over in Kissimmee, Florida in May of this year. This was part of the fight card that was headlined by Erickson Lubin versus Ardrell Holmes Jr. That was Pro Box TV. But this one here within the super bantamweight division, I think it was the WBA super bantamweight championship. You had Nazarena Romero and Mayeli Flores going at it for a number of those 10 rounds. And it was kind of like this whole little thing there where you had this 10 round, 2 minute rounds, and they went at it a very good scrap where Mayeli Flores was able to get a split decision win. And we had a late writing candidate of sorts there with this last nominee, right? And this one is for the WBC featherweight title there in Scott Nicholson versus Tiara Brown. That was over in Australia. You had Tiara Brown undefeated, Scott Nicholson undefeated, going in there as a WBC featherweight champion. A lot of people were like kind of picking Scott Nicholson because they didn't really know that much about Tiara Brown, and Scott Nicholson was the matchroom fighter and all that type of stuff. But Tiara Brown went into Australia, the home country there for Scott Nicholson, and was able to get a split decision victory to become the WBC featherweight champion. So those were the candidates that we have on there. And this one, we kind of had a little bit of indecisiveness of sorts there, for it. But this was the winner here, at least on this front, and that is Shadeja Green versus Savannah Marshall for the Boston Source Women's Fight of the Year. I think those two were pretty much like, at least on my front, they were kind of like evenly matched going into the fight. Um, even though like Savannah Marshall still had like most of the notoriety and things like that, number of people still may have not known enough about Shadeja Green, even though Shadeja Green was coming from around that class of the Clarissa Shields, the Franchon Cruz, and a number of other fighters that were in the U.S. team around that era. But with Shadeja Green getting the comeback win, I would say getting those rounds racked up in the second half of the fight, kind of like changed things on that front, and then was able to get a decision win to become the unified champion there at super middleweight. So that's why I have that as the women's fight of the year. Shadeja Green over Savannah Marshall on that front. Now, there may have been like other candidates out that I didn't necessarily name, but that one kind of like stood out, particularly on that card that was there in Madison Square Garden as the fight of the year, women's fight of the year on that front. So that's what I had on that thing there. It's gonna move forward to a fighter of the year here real quick. See if I could just do that here, and then I'll have Neverfold chime in on the fight of the year and the fighter of the year for women's. But for women's fighter of the year, We have five candidates there for this. All right. We got first nominee here is Alicia Baumgartner, who has two wins from this year. One against Jennifer Miranda on that fight card that was at Madison Square Garden, and then her latest win over Layla Badouin there that was pretty much a couple of weeks ago. There that was 12 rounds, 3 minutes per round, and she was able to win that by decision and become the she was undisputed, but now the WBC didn't necessarily approve this fight against Layla Badouin, so she is what the unified champion there at super bantamweight. And you have another candidate is Caroline Dubois, who is a division above Alicia Baumgartner. She does have wins over Bo Shin and Camila Panada that was on that fight card in December. There, where Alicia Baumgartner had the win over Layla Badouin. So that is another one of the nominees. We also have Clarissa Shields there, who was able to have the win over Lanny Daniels and Danielle Perkins, and is now the undisputed champion at heavyweight. Okay, so we have Clarissa Shields, and we have another nominee in Katie Taylor, who, as I mentioned, was able to get the decision over Amanda Serrano, and still be the top fighter within her particular division, getting that decision win in Madison Square Garden. And you also have there as a nominee Gabriela Fedora, undisputed champion in her division, getting wins over Marilyn Amaya and Alexis Kubicki, the stoppage wins or whatever it is there. But who we have here as the winner for Women's Fighter of the Year, man, I just had basically just say, hey, it's got to be Clarissa Shields. Got to be Clarissa Shields. You was able to score those two wins, like I mentioned, become undisputed there in the heavyweight division, of course, being multi-division undisputed champion, and of course, was able to score a multi-million-dollar deal here starting for 2026. And yes, she does have her upcoming fight against Franchon Cruz Zern on February 22nd in Detroit, Michigan. There, but for this year, we have Clarissa Shields as the Boxing Source 2025 Women's Fighter of the Year. So that's what I got there on that front. Anything there on you? Any takes on that from Neverfold? If you're still with us.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean, yeah, you gotta go with Clarissa Shields because she had two fights. First fight was a knockout, and a lot of people said that she ain't had no power. She proved that she got popped. You know what I'm saying? And with Katie Taylor, she only had one fight for the year. She had one more fight that could have been her, but we gotta go with Clarissa Shields.
Yeah, and you had the other fight that Clarissa had there against Danielle Perkins, and she was able to score a knockdown in that one too. But yeah, I just thought that her overall performance there for this year over like a Gabriela Fedora or a Katie Taylor, as you mentioned, there as standing out. So that's why you have Clarissa Shields there as the 2025 Women's Fighter of the Year. All right. So we got like a couple more here left there and things like that, man. And shout out to Joey Passarella there. Yeah, great job breaking it all down for the categories and candidates. Yeah, and yeah, prepared for the end of the year analysis, man. Yeah, for sure. Now I don't know. Now I can't come up with the trophies and stuff like that. I mean that probably take a little bit of work and all that type of stuff to do that and hand them out or try to get them to any of these folks here. But we just had these out here for them and was able to do that. So we got a couple of categories here left here real quick. We got Men's Fight of the Year. Not a number of good candidates. Like I did mention one that could have been on the list. We could have had, for some people they could have probably had that Nakatani versus Sebastian Hernandez as maybe a late entry, but wasn't able to make it. But we did have a few out here for this one. Here are the nominees that we got. Mention one in potential other nomination there, and that is Lester Martinez versus Christian and Billy. like I said, like that one to me in the super middleweight division was one that I kind of like anticipated as one of the better fights of the year, and it ended up being that, particularly in the second half of the fight. And as I mentioned, it just took a while for the crowd to catch up to what was going on in the ring. But it was a very, very good matchup between those two. And unfortunately, ended up being a draw. And the worst part about that is they ain't even going to have an immediate rematch. So I'm like, dang, man. So we can't really get that fight again here, at least, next on that front. All right. Next candidate we have on here is Isak Pitbull Cruz versus Angel Fierro. That was on February 1st at the T-Mobile Arena. I mentioned a thing there as far as like the event of the year. It was part of that fight card. The lead up to it. You had the pre-fight workouts. They had like an intense stare down at the pre-fight workouts. They, kept that up there in the weigh-in, after the weigh-in, and then in the fight, like the fight was just like action-packed from start to finish. We, got a couple of elements there from Isak Cruz, at least for me, that I hadn't seen from him, over the course of his professional career or the times that I've actually, been out to see his fights. And it ended up being, a great action-packed fight, and Isak Cruz got the decision win. But Angel Fierro like definitely made a great account of himself in that particular matchup. Um, Next one we have there is Kenshiro Taraji versus Seigo Akui here. And this one, man, hey, I talked about one of the other fights where you had the fight that was basically in the balance or something like that. And you talk about, as you mentioned there, Neverfold, like that home run hit there from Fabio Wardley that he had against Justice Hooney, right? You kind of like almost had that here in a sense in this fight between Kenshiro Taraji and Seigo Akui, because you had Akui that was very game. It was very competitive up until the final round. And then in the final round, you had Taraji being able to score a technical knockout victory there to get the win. And in the scorecards, they had it where Akui was leading going into the final round on two of the three scorecards. So if he was able to get through that last round and get a win on that round, he would have been able to get a decision win over Kenshiro Taraji, but ended up getting stopped by Taraji there on that front. So that is another candidate there for Fight of the Year. Next one up, we got David Benavidez versus David Morrell Jr. I mean, I talked about it before, and man, that one was one of the more well anticipated fights. We talked about the build up to that, and the fight definitely lived up to the hype. You had David Benavidez, getting through that part of adversity with the cuts, and was able to show a different element of his game. I would say within his punching. We had like punch output. He was using like someone said that Gennady Golovkin move with that. I would say like the overcut move. Just punching down, starting up and punching down, using a little bit of things as far as like pawn like the one hand out there from David Morrell Jr. and just shooting with the right. And then you had the whole thing that happened with the 11th round with the knockdown that was scored by David Morrell Jr. Then it ended up getting taken back as he was deducted a point for hitting after the bell. And 12th round, they was like going at it for a good little scrap. And hey, you see, like after the fight, they look bruised up and all that type of stuff there. So you did have that. You know what I mean? Hold on, Joey. You said what? Jake Paul versus Anthony Joshua's fight of the year. I hope you ain't saying that as a kid. That would be crazy. It's crazy work. All right. And you had Naoya Inoue versus Ramon Cardenas as a nominee for Fight of the Year. Ramon Cardenas was definitely game in the first part of this fight that happened at T-Mobile Arena in May or whatever it was. And you had the thing there when it came to the knockdown that was scored by Ramon Cardenas. But then Naoya Inoue was able to respond to that, eventually break him down, and get a stoppage victory there at the time to still be the undisputed champion there at 122 pounds. And so we did have that. Shout out to Bull Rider. He said that he chooses the failure of the year to be Keyshawn Davis, man. Oh man, that's crazy work though. But yeah, had those candidates there for men's fight of the year for 2025, man. And hey, a number of good candidates, number of good candidates there for that one. But I had to just give props to this one. Eastside Cruz versus Angel Fierro, man. Listen, man. If it wasn't for Benavidez Morel to be as good as it was, this I felt like this one would have like ran away with like fight of the year. Cause like I said, you had the build up to it, intense face offs before the fight, then going into this thing here, both of them going at it. Angel Fierro kind of like being a fighter there that was kind of like being shown to the public on a large scale for the first time, going up against a fan favorite at Isaac Pitbull Cruz, and both of them was game. Both of them was scrapping almost from like the opening bell. And like I said, I mean, you seen like almost like with Isak Cruz kind of like do a catch and shoot or like slip and counter in close quarters at different parts of the fight. And I just felt like this particular one stood out there over the other candidates for fight of the year. So I had Isak Cruz versus Angel Fierro as fight of the year. And the only thing about it was we could have had a rematch if it wasn't for Fierro like going into that fight week in July, almost like at 145 pounds or something like that. So we couldn't get a rematch between these two. But this original fight right here was just a great action packed fight from start to finish. So that's what I got for men's fight of the year right there. I never fold. What you got?
Man, that's a great pick. But for me, I gotta go with Lester versus Billy because that fight was so hard to score,
It was.
and they started from first round going at it till the end of the fight. So they kept going at it for the whole fight. So Lester Martinez and Billy, oh my god, that was like a throwback fight, bro. You feel me? So yeah, I had to go with that one, bro. But the Fiero versus Cruz, that was a great one too.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that one was great, man. And both of them were, man. Like I said, being live to see both of those, like I just knew that Martinez versus Billy was gonna be something. You know what I mean?
War.
And it was just an absolute scrap. Now, live at the time, I felt like Martinez was able to, get the win there, but it just ended up being a draw on that front. And like I said, I mean, I was just disappointed that they're not able to have a immediate rematch, but because of this fight and how good that was. But yeah, I had to give it to Isak Cruz and Fierro, man. That was just a definite good matchup there on that one.
It's crazy. It's crazy how we won't even get the rematch in both these fights. It's just insane.
Yeah, yep. I'm like, sometimes you will want to have a rematch if you know that a fight is that good, and have an immediate rematch because you know that a number of people are going to be interested in it. So but like I said, with the Cruz versus Fierro, we could have had the rematch in July. I think it was going to be part of that Pacquiao versus Barrios, but Fierro just couldn't have the weight, man. He was just ballooned up. It was a wrap. I don't even know why they even had him go out there for fight week because they had to have known that he wasn't going to be making weight for that. I mean, not even close. You know what I mean?
Is he
So
moving up in weight?
he had to, man. He had to at this part, but I have to see like where they're gonna have Isaac Fierro fight. You know what I mean? Or if he has like something here coming up. So that's one thing that I'm gonna see if I can look into here on that front. Or I mean, Angel Fierro, excuse me. But with that being said, that means there's only one category left here. Actually, you know what? Actually, look this up, man. Angel Fierro did have a fight. He had a fight on October 4th of this year against Abraham Cordero. Hold up. He had a fight against
I never
Abraham.
even heard about that.
Yeah,
Where
yeah,
they
I
fought
didn't
at in
even hear about
Mexico?
that. All right, here's the crazy part. He had the fight against Abraham Cordero in Tijuana, Mexico.
Hmm.
He lost that fight
Wow.
by disqualification for kicking his opponent. Oh,
What? Hey, hold up! But I seen Nick Ball do that to Doheny. They ain't
they ain't do that.
disqualify him. That's crazy,
Yeah.
man. Boxing for you, dog.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. All right, here we go with the final category here. Men's fighter of the year. Now, I mean, you didn't really have that many. Well, I would say, I mean, you had the obvious candidates to me, so to speak, because I mean, you just go ahead and name fighters that you might have around the top of the pound for pound list, and that's your your nominees or whatever it is, right? So you have of course you got Jesse Bam Rodriguez, had his win over Fumilele Cafu, and a recent one here against Fernando Martinez there. And of course, like I said, he's one step away from becoming undisputed champion in his weight class, right? And you got Naoya Inoue, as I mentioned here. Of course, undisputed champion, 122 pounds, having his 4 fights here this year, right? Including the one I mentioned there against Ramon Cardenas, going up against MJ Akhmadaliev, and the latest one here against David Allen Picasso Romero, whatever. Like I said, got almost as many names as Dikembe Mutombo. Shout out to Dikembe Mutombo, man. Rest in power, bro. All right, so you got Inoue, you got Alexander Usyk, who was able to become undisputed champion as he had the IBF belt relinquished before going up against Daniel Dubois. Daniel Dubois was there as the IBF champion, and as we mentioned there, he was able to get the knockout win in Wembley Stadium to become undisputed heavyweight champion there once again. And you have Terrence Crawford as nominee there, of course, having his win over Canelo Alvarez to become the undisputed super middleweight champion. Yes, I did say that WBC. He won. He defeated Canelo Alvarez to become the undisputed super middleweight champion. So those are the 4 nominees. And here, and we have the thing there as far as like the winner on this front end. Well, I mean, come on, given what happened on there, got to have Terrence Crawford as the Boxing Source 2025 Men's Fighter of the Year. Yeah, sometimes, some people kind of like say, hey, yeah, he only had one fight, but the magnitude of this fight against Canelo Alvarez was one that kind of like defined the current era here in boxing. Okay. Now, some people would say that given his announcement of his retirement, that maybe he might not be in the running for fighter of the decade. But given what's happened from the era of Floyd Mayweather retiring up until now, you had to see who would become known as the best fighter of this particular era. And that's why you had this fight with the Canelo Alvarez and Terrence Crawford, who was, viewed as those top pound for pound fighters within that, time period, right? So as Terrence Crawford said, like, hey, if he was able to get this win over Canelo Alvarez, he said, hey, my name's going to be stamped in the history books and the debate will be over. That's what he said. And he was able to do that. He defined himself as the fighter of this era. And that's why, at least for 2025, you have your men's fighter of the year, Terrence Bud Crawford. There it is. What you got, Neverfold?
Hey, man. Anybody else that's not picking Crawford, that says a lot about you, man. Because we know for a fact a lot of these people's was picking Crawford to get knocked out. They was thinking about Madrimov fight. They was thinking about Gamboa, all this stuff, and Crawford came out. He did what everybody that believed in him knew that he was gonna do. So it wasn't a surprise, and you got to give it to Crawford. Three weight division win up, cook Canelo. Canelo ain't even win one round. He looked bad to the point now he ducking a rematch. We haven't heard from Canelo about fighting. You know what I mean? Hey,
I mean, I've heard some reports about him saying that he wants a rematch, but that was before you had Terrence Crawford announcing his retirement. As far as like the fight itself, you know, for a while they had the fight announced, right? And some people had their doubts or whatever it is and things like that. But I was like, you know what? I feel like this is something that Terrence Crawford could have. And I think it was, as the saying goes, sometimes styles make fights. But the other thing was, it's like with Terrence Crawford, he has it to the point where he'll go to another level in order
yep,
to try to get the win.
yep. He
And
raised it up.
you you didn't really see that much with Canelo Alvarez,
Yep,
outside of maybe, let's say,
the
the
rich.
rematch that he had against Gennady Golovkin in the second fight. You
Yep,
had the thing, of course, what happened in the first fight. Some people felt like he lost the first fight or whatever it is. It ended up being a draw. In the second fight, the fight was in the balance, and they had this whole thing about him talking about, oh, he doesn't necessarily want to be in the pocket and scrap with Gennady Golovkin, and he ended up doing that in the second fight and got the win, right? But in some of the other bouts that he had, like against Dimitri Bivol or whatever it was, and in the Dimitri Bivol fight, he looked like he was
checked out.
disgusted, frustrated in multiple moments of that fight. Here against Terrence Crawford, you've seen the same thing because
Yep,
Crawford just had it to where, okay, after these first few rounds, if I'm able to see what he's doing, and if I'm able to, kind
it's
of like
over with.
just to be more active, I got him. And in a good part of the fight, by round 8 or round 9, he knew that he got him. And you seen there that Canelo Alvarez had that instance where he was frustrated because he knew that he couldn't really get the upper hand like he thought he would be able to do against Terrence Crawford there. So when the fight went to the scorecards, those scores were much closer than they actually should have been. But I knew that live because by the time it was like round 10 or round 11, I thought that Terrence Crawford would have to get a couple of these rounds just to secure the victory on the cards. Because I already had it. Like, I knew it was going to, I felt it was like 8-4 by the time it went through 12 rounds. And one of those scores was 8-4. But having it 7 rounds to 5, you know that it was very close on the scorecards for Canelo Alvarez there. But I just knew that Crawford was going to get the win there. And yeah, I was going to stand by that, so to speak. So,
Yeah, so with that fight, I ain't had a single problem except for the judges cheating and PEDs. That's it. No Canelo coming in, landing a shot. None of that had me worried, bro. Like
yeah,
soon as the fight got signed, I bet money on that, bro. To the
yeah.
point, I bet 10 people, only one paid me. I haven't
Oh,
heard from the rest of the nine since.
man.
Like it's
Hey,
crazy.
yeah. I mean, it was like, man, I had a feeling about it from I think February or March. Um, of course, Canelo's performance against William Skull was like one thing, and I just felt like I said, the styles just made the fight, and I felt like Terrence Crawford like really didn't have to do much as far as like being what I say like offensively active. As long as he was just disciplined and poised on both ends, then he would be able to get the fight on that front. You know what I
You,
mean?
you know what's crazy? A lot of people were stressing about the judges, and Team Crawford did not bring that up one time. That's how confident they were that they were gonna beat Canelo, bro.
Yeah, yep. That was the thing about it, man. And I thought the only thing that I didn't get from the result of that fight, and even though like I said from years back, I didn't even pick Crawford in that sense, but you know what happened there in the fight between Crawford and Spence, and
Get active.
Crawford ended up getting the in the win and become undisputed at welterweight. But then after that, you had the whole thing with the video of the locker room and Coach Boback go there. What?
Oh yeah,
What?
I told
What? I told you. I told you. Man, I wish you would have said just for this fight against Canelo. Fuck him. If he would have did that again, that would have been funny. But hey, like props to Terrence Crawford for that performance there. Props to his team there. You know, like you said, you got Bobak McIntyre, you got Esau Dieguez, you got Red Spikes there in the corner there. You got Bernie the Boxer also there. So they were able to be, um, you know, all there for the performance there of Terrence Crawford getting the win over Canelo Alvarez. And, with that being said, that is why he is the Boxing Source 2025 Fighter of the Year. So there you go. That is the Boxing Source 2025 awards right there. And yeah, you'll be able to you'll catch everything on the replay. I'll post the winners on social media. That's going to be happening here also. So we do have all of that. Big thanks for everyone that's been able to stick with us here for the live portion of the Boxing Source Awards show here. And shout out to Neverfold Sports for also chiming in on each of the categories there. And for those that were on the live chat here on this front end, shout out to everyone that's been watching on Instagram as well here, and also through Rumble. And I don't know if it, like I said, I don't know if it was on Kick or anything like that, but thanks for everyone that's been able to watch here live. You'll be able to see the replay, whether it's on YouTube or Rumble or in audio form here later on down the line. So you'll be able to listen to it or watch it on demand here. But like I said, I mean that kind of like brings a close to the year 2025. I am thinking about doing a midweek report of sorts. Of course, it's going to be January 2026 is coming here around the corner. But the day before there for December 31st, 2025, we'll have a midweek report where we kind of like look ahead to some of the fights to be on the lookout for in 2026, among other things here. So we're gonna definitely have that here on the Boxing Source channel. All right. So for those that's been showing support, we thank y'all here for doing that here for us on the Boxing Source. We got a number of things here that we're looking forward to doing it here in 2026. Of course, y'all know about what's going on as far as like me starting a project there with the trading cards that it's been having a little bit of success, but we still got a little bit more work to do here when it comes to the overall release of the trading cards here. But we got another number of individual cards that's been released already, and we got a number of them that's going to be on slate for next month because of a couple of big events happening next month. We're going to have a number of trading cards should be ready to go for next month as well. So y'all look forward to that. But that's what I have here. I do have I guess, a phone call of sorts, or a few people that I have to contact here within the sport of boxing here over these next couple of days. But hey, we always working here at the Boxing Source, and also y'all look forward to on the YouTube channel. We're gonna have a couple of interviews here posted tomorrow here as I was out and about in the gyms in the DC area this weekend. So y'all be on the lookout for that as well. All right. So with that being said, that's what I got here for the Boxing Source. And I will see you on December 31st, y'all. Peace out.